Hello, everyone. You're listening to Digital Builder, a podcast brought to you by Autodesk, made for construction professionals who want to hear from those on the forefront of construction technology. If you're looking for conversations centered around where the industry is going, this podcast is for you. Each episode will feature a conversation with a construction industry leader. Together, we'll dig in on themes related to connected construction and discuss where the future of the construction industry is headed. Now let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of Digital Builder. I'm your host, Eric Thomas. This week, I'm joined by two guests hailing all the way from Europe to discuss how digital transformations are unfolding in EMEA, with an emphasis on how to create positive, measurable outcomes for construction teams. For those listening that aren't big on acronyms, EMEA stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And on today's show, we'll also discuss how you should be benchmarking yourself as an organization and which key performance indicators or KPIs are important to consider when looking to improve project delivery. With that said, my guests this week are Ivana Tudja, a BIM and engineering lead at Mace Group, and Matt Keane, senior industry strategist at Autodesk. Thanks for joining me on the show today. Let's start by hearing about your backgrounds and experiences in the construction industry. Ivana, how about you go first?
Thank you, Eric. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for waking up so early to host your European guests. As you already said, my name is Ivana and I'm a BIM and digital engineering lead at Mace. And I'm working from our London office. I'm based in our London office, or maybe it's better to say that I'm working from my London home with the current situation. In terms of Mace is an international developer, consultant, constructor, and operator. And I work in our construction part of the business. I'm a lead for our PREACH business unit. And PREACH stands for Public Estates, Research, Education, Arts and Culture, and Healthcare. I'm also a company lead for Autodesk Cloud Solutions. And I have a team of amazing individuals, or as we like to call them, Bim Geeks, who are working on all things digital at Mace. In terms of my background, there are two things which are really important for my career. First of them is that I'm a qualified architect. I used to practice architecture for a number of years before making what seemed to be at the time a very radical move into construction. And the other really important one is that I used to be Autodesk certified instructor for a number of years. So I would train people on how to use Autodesk software. When I mentioned my radical move, I think when I announced I'm moving into construction, that was quite unexpected, as I spent probably 10 years of studying to become an architect. Basically, what this allowed me to do was to merge my two big passions. One was a passion for technology, and the other one was passion for design and seeing things being built. So I'm really happy that I made that move, and I've actually never looked back, so that's great.
It's been a fun conversation when I get to speak to architects who have made similar moves to yours. And I think we've had a couple guests on the show so far that have done that, where they go, okay, like this construction tech is something that seems interesting and have made that transition. And I think having that background just gives you a much more powerful tool set as you collaborate across the team and build up your experience in your current position. Matt, can you talk a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thanks for having us, Eric. And Ivana, it was good to hear all about your journey. Mine's a little bit similar in the fact that I started in computer science and then moved over to construction. So I made a leap myself. But I'm an industry strategist at Autodesk. It's a very fancy title for a role that we, in terms of industry strategy, we look at which markets we should be going into, how do we execute in those markets, and then more importantly, how is it that we make sure that what we're delivering really resonates with customers in either my region, which we call EMEA, APAC, Asia Pacific, or the Americas market. So I work with a global team to really assess how we're going to ensure that we're relevant in terms of what we build and what we market and what we sell. My background is construction. Before I joined Autodesk, I spent 9 years working for a main contractor in the UK. So I worked for a company called Wilmot Dixon, and I worked in lots of different areas, including project management, design, sustainability, and ultimately I ended up being the head of BIM for a short while before joining Autodesk. So that's my background, Eric.
I like it. We've got a cool range of experience to kind of unpack what's going on in EMEA. That's going to be a fun conversation. And funnily enough, my journey into construction had a very brief moment in computer science as well. Although I only did one semester in college before I realized, oh no, my brain does not work this way, and ended up making a transition into communications, which landed me in my current seat. So
I'm very similar. I realized that I wasn't a computer scientist at all, so I made the leap as soon as I was given the opportunity.
All right. Well, for the first segment of the show, we're going to be discussing digital transformations with a focus on the digitization landscape unfolding in EMEA. And I know the phrase digital transformation has approached buzzword territory at times, but I do feel it's an authentic way to describe changes in construction tied to the availability of industry-specific tools that offer ways to improve workflows and project outcomes. So to kick things off, let's start with the basics here. Ivana, can you tell me what comes to mind when you hear the term digital transformation? And can you explain the business value of digitization in construction?
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think construction industry is very specific, and changes have been happening so slowly through years that actually, things that are happening now actually feel like a whole transformation. So yeah, it is a buzzword, but I think it's really hard to avoid it. I think, things that come to my mind are these new ways of working, which we are establishing now. And I think, we're in such an exciting time where we can define how construction industry will look in the future. So I'm really happy that I think changes, like very intense changes, only started probably a few years ago. And now we can see that everything is just speeding up and they're happening so quickly. So yeah, I'm really excited to be there in this specific moment of time and define how the future of construction will look like.
So I think it's a lot of fun right now to see all of this transformation going on. We've had this kind of hockey stick growth in construction-specific technology that didn't exist when I joined the industry, a decade ago. It was all, spreadsheets and using Microsoft Office and all kinds of other stuff in a very disconnected fashion. And the intention between, product design and the willingness for our peers to embrace technology have really brought us a long way in the last 5 to 10 years in particular. Matt, do you have any thoughts there as far as what digital transformation means to our customers?
Yeah, I think when I think of digital transformation, I think that it's really change management. And what I've seen with a lot of the customers that I've had the pleasure of working with is that they're trying to work out a lot of this. Now, one of the things that's really appealed to me about the intersection between technology and construction is there's so much opportunity there, and I think that's what you've seen in the last 5 years is that the startup community has seen that opportunity and it's just exploded. So there's so many different solutions that customers can go and choose now. I mean, I'm kind of glad I'm not on the customer side now. I have to be, it has to be said, because there is so much choice there. And I usually use the term when I'm talking to customers, and I probably sound like a broken record, but I think customers have traditionally purchased point solutions to solve point problems. And I think what's really interesting now is with a lot of the software as a service and platform as a service players, what we're actually seeing is that there's a lot of what was purchased as point solutions is now really coming together and starting to interconnect, which makes it really exciting as to what technology can really do for the construction market.
Yeah, removing those disconnections and those data silos is so important, and I think even in the last 2 years we've gotten much better about it. And I think people are more aware of what happens when you do lose that amount of data as you kind of move through all the phases of construction. So, yeah. Matt, can you tell me a little bit more about EMEA specifically? Like, what's the landscape like? I mean, I'm over here, of course, in California, and I'm thankful we've got some, a bit more distinguished accents on the call today. So I'm happy for our listeners on that front. But I'd love to know if there's some consistency across the board from country to country, and what that technology adoption looks like.
Yeah, I mean, when you compare Europe to the US, I mean, if you think of the number of different countries and different languages that we have to deal with, there's so much variance in terms of, I'd almost call it digital maturity. And what we've got is that it's not just it not just happens on a country specific basis, but it almost happens in terms of like the different types of customers that you've got. So we've got some really advanced main contractors, or GCs as you would call them in the US. I think that's because they have a little bit more money to invest on the technology side, but there's still this long tail of subcontractors and specialty contractors that don't have the same amount of money to invest in technology, that are still working out how do they play with a contractor, and how do they actually use technology to really improve their business. So it's different from country to country, and we've seen some leaders, I would say, in terms of the UK market, maybe the Netherlands and the Nordics, and certainly Germany. But then you've got other countries, say in Eastern Europe, that are probably a little bit further behind, and it's just different based on where you are, but it's also different based on the type of company you are in that given market.
I think that's interesting because, I think as Matt is saying, you can see how different companies are operating differently. And although, Mace, I work for Mace, which is a big business, I'm actually fully aware of these differences because we work with a large supply chain. And, they come in different, obviously, sizes, and they have different interests. And their digital journey could be completely different than ours. And I think what's really important for us, if we want to be successful, they need to be their part of our success. So as part of our journey, we need to support them alongside us. And because of it, we've established, a number of things like our digital training academy that's focused on supply chain trainings. I always work with my team and ask them to organize workshops on the project and make sure that it's not just our guys who are involved. We also invite supply chain and we provide training for them. And it's not just supply chain, even looking at our projects. So we'll have some really small jobs, and we'll have, even in my sector, we'll have major projects that are 10 times bigger. And I think it's important to think about that and think about the digital strategy for every single job. Because obviously, a very small project won't be able to make a huge investment and get really fancy technology for themselves. But then I don't want them to be left behind because of it, So I think what's important, there isn't one solution that fits everyone, And then when you think about our big jobs, I don't want them to fail because we've established all of these workflows which will work for a small job but not they can't be scaled up. So I think there's a big diversity inside of the company, and then when you look at the huge market, obviously there'll be many differences as well.
There's definitely commonality in the United States, even though we're not speaking on a country-to-country basis. Just based on, like you said, the size of the company really does impact their ability to focus on digitization. So like $1 billion general contractor or main contractor has the ability to put more time and energy into that digitization process. But I think that those mid-market and smaller companies do get to do that. It just requires a bit more of an intentional conversation and a little bit more deliberateness with, budget. And Ivana, you make a great point. The small projects don't necessarily get to do that because, they're more worried about the margin. They have less time to focus on it. But when you do roll out new technology on some of those bigger projects where the budget can accommodate some of that, once you've learned, how to set that process up, you still do get to implement it as a company, at the smaller scale. So it's a lot of fun there. And I'd love to hear specifically about some of the barriers that you've seen when considering digitizing construction workflows, and what challenges seem to come up the most when, the company you've worked for have tried to tackle it, Ivana, or, other companies you've collaborated with.
I think the first thing that comes to everyone's mind when it comes to digitalization is the price of this whole thing. And obviously, new technologies can be expensive. But I think what's even more expensive is not to make any change, right? And just keep going and going with the same ways of working, and maybe just creating inefficiencies and continuing with inefficiencies that you've always had. So I think to tackle this, we really need to, as an industry, we need to become much better in capturing benefits and returns of investments and success stories. And I think, that's something that can then help us to understand, how we return this investment, and is it worth investing in digitalization? And I would argue that when you look at all the benefits you might see in terms of pricing, you might see a completely different story at the end. And then another really important thing, I think, at the moment is finding the right people, right? So you need to know that, I said this a few times already, things have changed so much in the last few years, right? So imagine we went from, okay, we don't need this digitalization thing, doesn't exist. And then all of a sudden it's like quickly, let's do it. And all of a sudden we have all of these roles which haven't existed only a few years ago. And, I think construction is complex and very unique, and it takes you time to get the right experience, right? If you look at our long-term projects, it will take you years before you see it happening from the beginning till the end. So for me, again, to resolve this, I think it's really important to get the right talent on board. And to do that, we need to make, I think, construction industry look a bit more attractive than and kind of remove this grim picture that it has at the moment. Luckily, I know that there are many talented people out there, so we can definitely, if we can attract them, then we can train them to learn things that are specific for the industry and become great leaders in this digitalization space at the end. One thing that construction has also suffered from for a very long time is actually really bad construction tech. So I think products that we used for a while maybe weren't that great, and they weren't very user friendly. And Matt has mentioned, all of these investments that are going now into construction tech, which is a great news. And every day you see a new startup in Silicon Valley creating something really new and exciting. And I really think that these companies now are not, one thing that they're focused on is also user experience, right? So the solutions that we get now are much more user-friendly, and I think that will also help us to overcome some barriers to adoption. Because as when you think about things, if you want to do some online shopping, it's not like you get the training, do you? You'll install an app, and with many other apps, you'll install an app and do it really quickly without any training. And I'm definitely not saying let's not train our staff, but what I'm trying to say, if we have these solutions which are really easy to use, then that will definitely help us to implement things.
I think you're absolutely right there. And I came into, construction technology after working for a few GCs through PlanGrid. And that was always our mantra before we got, acquired by Autodesk was this needs to be easy and intuitive to use for the field or nobody's going to use it. And that still holds true, and it's made its way into a lot of the new products that we have, and it's become kind of an industry baseline. But I think you're absolutely right. And that perception problem is something that we talk about on the show pretty frequently. But I think young people in particular are starting to see that there is a lot of really cool technology in construction, drones, 360 cameras, all kinds of software that's easy to use and makes people able to focus on building, which is the fun thing about construction and something that everybody's really passionate about. So it's been a really fun journey to see, even in the the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Matt, do you have any thoughts there as far as the blockers that we're seeing, or any advice for people as they experience this abrupt digital transformation at their organizations?
So I think one of the biggest kind of barriers that we see is just, we touched on perception, but actually it's about people's attitude to change. And I've worked with lots of teams, especially where you've got people who feel uncomfortable in using technology even in their day-to-day lives, and then they're being forced to use it in their working lives as well. I think we saw, even when we go way back and we have a look at what was that transition when people stopped using the fax machine on site and started using email. It took people a while to get to that, but I think that a lot of us are now much more digitally native, I suppose would be the term to use. And to the point that Ivana made about, it's a lot easier now to pick up something. User experience and user design is something that is at the forefront of most apps and technology platforms today, because they want people to easily pick it up. And I mean, I always find it incredible in the fact that I've never ever spoken to anyone at Amazon, and yet everybody knows how to use that platform. And I think that, to Ivana's point, which was quite right, the processes are the things that you have to learn within construction. And the training that you get it should be that you understand how a building goes together, how it operates, and then we kind of go from there.
I think you're absolutely right. And there's so much tied into getting construction teams to adopt different types of technology. Like the age ranges on a job site are dramatically, or range dramatically from, people just fresh out of college in their early 20s to very experienced superintendents and project managers who have got 30 or 40 years of, construction experience. And getting those two cohorts to talk and help share knowledge is so important. And I actually had a buddy of mine say something last night to me that really resonated on this particular topic. And it ties back into how you define success. And the different generations define success in very different ways. And until you get some clarity on where they're coming from each side of the board, sometimes it's really difficult to meet in the middle. But the fun thing there, I think, is when you get the early 20-somethings who are really keen with technology and are, truly digital natives, and those project managers who might be in their 40s or 50s and have a wealth of experience building, is there so much cool opportunity for knowledge sharing there from both parties that once you get them on the same page, everybody's excited. It's just once you get them to speak that same language, and it takes a little bit sometimes, like you said, there's reluctance to, adopt technology sometimes, or it might not be intuitive. But, when you find that spark and you find that equal playing ground as far as success goes, like things move together and move forward really quickly.
Yeah, we've had a couple of customers who have done something which they call it reverse mentoring, which is actually getting the younger, more digitally native members of the team to mentor the older members of the team and help them in terms of picking up the technology. And then the mentoring happens in terms of, well, what's the build process? I heard a statistic the other day which said that 20% of the construction workforce will retire within the next 5 years. So if you think about that knowledge drain out of the industry, I mean, that's huge. So, using technology in order to bridge that gap, for me, is a really big opportunity that I think that as an industry we need to be taking hold of.
I agree completely with you on that one. It's going to be interesting to see how the challenges we already have as an industry with labor shortages are going to change in the next 5 years. And so setting up programs like that reverse mentorship now are so important, because you need to start building that framework now. You need to start that knowledge transfer now. Otherwise, you're going to be caught and surprised down the line. And when we talk about digitization, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, building information modeling or BIM adoption. And Ivana, you mentioned BIM Geeks earlier, which made me chuckle. I think everybody who's passionate about technology in some way, defines themselves as a construction geek, or I see the term construction dork float around, which is another podcast in the AEC industry, actually. And Matt, I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about the government-driven BIM mandates that have driven that adoption. I know it's in the UK and other parts of Europe. And also, can you just, for the listeners who might not be familiar, can you give a quick description of what the heck BIM is?
Yeah, sure. So BIM is the use of 3D models and the data that's embedded in those models to actually manage the design and construction process. And because the model is a single source of truth, it means that the whole project team can collaborate around it, unlike the sharing of drawing sheets and the continual iterations that you get with those. So, it's a slightly more advanced way of working, and it means that processes need to be in place to make sure that people are actually addressing and working with that model in the right way. But one of the things that happened was the UK government back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013, stated that by 2016 every UK government project would be using building information modeling. And what that did is it changed this pool of a group of enthusiasts or people who could see the benefits. It moved that pool to a push. So organizations then had to really jump on board and say, right, well, this is something that we now need to understand better. And I certainly saw that. I joined Autodesk in 2012. We saw an explosion in the number of contractors that started engaging with us and having conversations about how do they actually use digital technology, and in particular building information modeling, to actually manage their projects, and what are the benefits that you get. And what you saw is it used to be small BIM teams within the organization, and then it was how do you actually get that into the hands of everybody so that they could engage with it.
Ivana, can you tell us a little bit about how the Bim Geeks feel about this?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure how are they going to feel about the fact that they've announced this nickname to the whole world. So good luck to me with that.
I think it's a good one. It's a good one. There's no negative connotation there.
Well, yeah, talking about BIM and especially BIM Level 2 mandate in the UK, I was lucky enough to, well, basically all of the projects that I've worked on in construction have been BIM Level 2 projects because, as I said, I work in public sector. So this is something that would be mandated by the government on all the public sector projects since 2016. And I think it's really interesting, how the whole thing started, because I think at first we had clients coming to us and telling us, look, we need to do this. Could you please help us out and tell us how to achieve, what the government is asking us to do? And I think through, the whole process, both us and them learned a lot. And I think what we are seeing now is all of this, groups of very educated clients who are not doing things just because the government is asking them to do something. They're doing it because they've seen benefits and they want to extend these benefits on all of their other jobs. So as part of it, we are now getting projects where the clients are not sharing 2D documentation and they only want us to, for example, price the job based on 3D models, which is really interesting, and it really pushes the boundaries in the industry. And also through this whole process, when we first started, I think sometimes all the clients had to do these things. Maybe they didn't really believe in the power of technology, especially the older generation. I think this was the mandate was such a good opportunity for us to show them new ways of working and open their eyes to certain things. So I still remember kind of early days when I tried convincing one of our clients to try a VR headset. And he was very polite, but said that it looks really exciting. But it was no way. He was trying it. And then as we went around the room and everyone did a little walkthrough through the building, and everyone really enjoyed it. He thought like, okay, I'll give it a go. And he absolutely loved it, to the point that after that, every time we would have a headset, he would have to do another walkthrough. So it's good when you get, I think it's really powerful when you kind of change people's minds, because these people later on are your biggest promoter, like they're your biggest aliases in terms of supporting technology. And also on the back of the whole mandate, I think this had an impact on our private clients as well. So especially when you talk about our big pharma clients or big tech clients, they're now coming up with absolutely incredible set of requirements, and they want to see these fully digitalized workflows, and it's really exciting to work on all of these things.
I like hearing how that's, progressed since the mandate started. And I'm not surprised to hear that, I guess, because once you do get that proof case in place, even if it was forced initially, people start, having the light bulb turn on, much like the person that you were working with the VR headset. And I remember the first time I put one of those on, I was a little skeptical myself, not out of disinterest in trying it, but I didn't really understand the power of being able to do, a site walk on a project that hasn't actually been built yet. And we were using it for two things. One was kind of a marketing pitch for, early bid and proposal efforts, where we'd model a portion of whatever we were bidding on to say, hey, this is what we can actually do and what your building is going to look like, which is often the first time that the client had actually ever seen that, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, the other one would be, hey, here's some clash detection, your pipe is going through this wall, et cetera, et cetera. We got to make some tweaks, and essentially showcases the value of the VDC team that we were bringing to the table, because they were able to identify all of that even at the bid and proposal or early tender stage, as you would say in your region. I'm curious to hear how the other parts of EMEA have handled BIM adoption outside of the UK. Has there been any consistency in standards from country to country as far as collaboration goes?
There was an EU BIM task group that started looking at this. So European Union BIM task group, which started looking at it, Eric, to try and get some consistency in terms of what was asking for. But I think each country has been slightly different, and from what that's meant is that especially from a technology provider's perspective, or if you're a customer, if you're a construction company that has offices in different countries and regions, then you've got to deal with all of those different mandates and requirements, which can be, it can be challenging. So I think it's just about really understanding what it is at that local market level that you need to adhere to, and everybody's doing it slightly differently. I mean, if you take the Nordic countries, they're really big on interoperability between file formats, which is a really good thing to see. And whilst I think that that was something that we wanted to see in the UK, for example, we haven't probably doubled down on that as much as they did in the Nordics.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to pivot to the second segment of the show, which is more focused around industry outcomes. And we'll also discuss choosing how to evaluate your organization when looking to improve your project delivery. And I think these themes tie directly into digital transformation because digital workflows really lay the groundwork for more meaningful performance benchmarks. And so I'd like to start with a question for Matt. And if I'm being honest, I think more than 75% of the conversations you and I have ever had have been loosely tied to the theme of outcomes in construction. So if anything, I do really applaud your consistency here. But I'd like to take a step back for a moment and give you an opportunity to share what you really mean when discussing outcomes with customers and other industry stakeholders.
Yeah, sure. So I think the challenge when you're a technology company is every problem looks like a technology problem that could be solved with technology. So the reason that we really focused on this concept of outcomes, which is actually saying that fundamentally contractors don't deal with technology problems, they deal with business problems. So how is it that we could really focus all of our teams on what those business problems were and then see if there was a technology fit? So what we did was we spent a lot of time looking at the industry with customers, really understanding what were the things that they really cared about, what were the things that they really wanted to focus on. And effectively, we boiled it down to 5 impactful areas that we knew that was consistent across the whole of the construction industry. So in winning work, quality, cost, schedule, and health, safety, and environment, or HS&E. And I think what that allowed us to do was then say, how is it that whatever we're designing from a technology perspective and building from a technology perspective actually addresses those areas, and made sure that whenever we were either marketing, talking to customers, following up with them in terms of their adoption of the technology, how could we make sure that those outcomes were front and center of everything that we did? So it's a real focus that we've taken. I think it's pretty common across a lot of software as a service providers, but it's something that we've really doubled down on in the last 12, 18 months, I would say.
I really like it because it does capture the nuance of what a construction project really is from start to finish, and how it impacts all of the parties and the players, and the safety aspect, of course, is absolutely critical since that's paramount on any construction project. And when you consider outcomes for a construction company or a construction project, how far out in the future should our customers be thinking? And Ivana, I'd love to hear your take on this one.
Yeah, so what's important is that you're able to, I think you need to, sit down and just think not about how you're delivering things now, but how could they work in the future? And, is there something that's just coming up and it looks really interesting, but in a few years from now, it might become a standard. So you need to put it in your digital strategy early on.
I like the fact that your team is thinking so far ahead, and I think it's an important thing to consider for most of the listeners out there, because it's easy, especially with how busy most construction professionals are, to be very focused on the moment and, in a sense, oftentimes reactive to current circumstances versus being proactive and making some of those choices for, how the outcome's going to look in a year or 6 months or, whatever that may be. So I think those companies that have been around for a long time and have been wildly successful through downturns and recessions and everything else are those ones that said, okay, regardless of what's happening today, whether it's a global pandemic or an economic recession or, a change in how we build or deliver or shortages of materials or whatever, at the same time, they're still carving out a small portion of their time to look, okay, 2, 4, 5, 10, 15 years down the road and say what might be happening and what should we be doing now to be able to react to those so we can, take care of our employees and better serve our customers and everything along those lines.
Yeah, I think when I think about my team, we need to have although we are part of such a big company, I think we need to have this flexibility, and in terms of our mindset, we almost need to be like a little startup, right? And we need to be able to, with things changing so fast, we need to be able to make changes fast as well. And even in terms of setting up workflows, I think when you need to test things, you won't always succeed, and this ability to just accept that and move on quickly is really important.
I think one of the most impressive things about the construction industry is how good everyone is at solving those problems. It's every day there are surprises on a construction project, whether it's, the first day you break ground and you dig a hole and find a surprise power line that was not supposed to be there that, changes, the scope of what you're doing that day. Or, you have to do some rework because the owner has changed their mind on the outcome of something, or, so many things can happen. So it's always just really impressive to step back and go, wow, like, we solve those problems. Everybody, gets the project built at the end of the day, and hopefully delivers a satisfactory outcome for the customer and the owner of the project. So,
sorry, I just want to say one thing about it. Everyone keeps talking about, I think many people as a barrier to adoption see the fact that we maybe have older generation on site. I actually always question that, right? Because as you said, construction is so impressive and there's so many issues happening all the time. And these guys actually have a very technical mindset, So my question is, if they already have this technical mindset, they should be able to, we should be able to get them to change their work, the way they're working quite quickly. So I think probably as I used to be a trainer, I always think about, how do we train these people? How do we get them to buy into this technology? And I always think about one of my colleagues, older colleagues actually, who I went to his office to explain something to him. And I still remember he turned around and he said, you know what, Ivana, technology is not the problem. The problem is the way we are trained, and this is why I think it's really important to have to know who you're working with. And when you're implementing field, you can't do that from your office, can you? I mean, with the teams and stuff, obviously we can do it through the camera and so on, but I think it's really important to know your users and to get their feedback and understand what their challenges are. Because if you have this direct communication and you're aware of everything that's happening, I think you can get rid of most of the problems that you might be facing.
I agree completely. It's getting that stakeholder buy-in is so incredibly important, and it's a messaging issue more so than anything. And you can have the greatest idea in the world or the most advanced and easy to use technology that's ever been invented, but unless you are intentional about how you bring your team along for the ride, you're really setting yourself up for failure at that point because you haven't gotten that buy-in. And I've always seen this, and I've heard it from a lot of the guests that I've talked to and customers and colleagues when I was still, working in industry specifically about this, is like once you get that buy-in, once you, get that light bulb moment where you go, we'd like you to do this reason and here's why, and you show them, they're so much more inclined to go, oh yes, this is what we do. And now you've got champions across the board who enthusiastically are adopting technology instead of accepting it because you prescriptively told them that they had to. And I'd like to pivot to how we measure some of this. And Matt, you and I have talked about key performance indicators or KPIs a lot in the past, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your feelings on how leveraging KPIs ties directly into improving project outcomes and why it really matters for all the construction peers listening today.
I always think of KPIs like it's like a health score is probably the easiest way to do it. We all want to know that our heart rate is in the right zone and that our cholesterol levels are at the right level. It's exactly the same when it comes to projects. You want to know you're on time, you're on budget. It's no different. You're actually looking at project health. So a lot of those key performance indicators are known across the board. I think, especially when it comes to cost and schedule, I think most people will always talk about those. I sometimes feel a little bit for quality. It always seems to get left behind, maybe because it's a little bit harder to measure. But we have seen some customers who have come up with really good quality indexes so that they can compare quality from job site to job site, which at least allows for it to be part of the mix. And if you look at some of the key performance indicators that are in use within the industry, whether that's win rate or whether that's the accident frequency rate or the EMR, those sorts of things allow you to compare yourself to either other projects within your own organization and say, right, what does good look like and how is it that we address poor performance? Or can you actually use it at more of an industry scale and actually really talk about how is it that we know what good does look like from a construction industry perspective? What does innovation and best practice really look like, and how could we replicate that on our own projects? So I think measuring is so important, and capturing that data and gathering that data at scale. It's really hard to do, but I think that's where technology gives us such an opportunity to really gather all of that data around some of these key performance indicators and then use that to do some peer-to-peer benchmarking so people can understand what does good look like and how do we improve.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. And in making a concerted effort to define what success looks like really becomes important as you scale your organization and move from project to project. And not every construction project is the same, unless you're like in a retail environment. That might be different, where you stand up the same build every time and you have lessons learned that you can roll across the board to everything you're doing. But there are still lessons learned that you can take once you've taken that moment to step back and go, okay, this is how we define success, this is what's worked. And while that project scope might not necessarily be the same from building A in London to building Z in Wales or something along those lines, there are still things you can learn from that as an organization if you're looking inwardly and defining some of that. And Ivana, I'd love to hear how you've found success when applying KPIs to your projects, and has that process changed as we've become a more digitized industry in the recent years?
Yeah, for sure, Eric. I think things have actually changed significantly, and we've progressed a lot. So I think in early days, focus was definitely on coordination. So in terms of, and so it's like it was more about early stages, and I think the main outcome here would be improved coordination on the project as the main indicator of the success. And I think we've expanded this field so much now. So we're not talking, in general, we've spoken about the word BIM, but we're not talking about BIM anymore. We're talking about digital engineering, which is really important to point that out. So I think our focus has now shifted. So we're almost taking into account that we know how to do coordination. So that's kind of covered as a minimum. That's what we expect. But then, our focus have shifted on other things, and we want to focus on optimizing programs and how do we use models better to do quantification. And Matt has mentioned quality as a really, really important aspect in terms of service excellence. So getting to the end of job with zero defects, which actually we've just achieved that on one of my jobs, and we're really proud of it, and we really think that technology has supported the whole process. So yeah, we're just looking at the bigger picture, and again mentioning our business strategy. Sustainability now is a huge part of it. So we're looking into. I'm working closely with our sustainability managers to see how can we support them with the technology. And then, of course, customer satisfaction. That's always a big driver, and actually, that's something that hasn't changed. Yeah, but I think the biggest shift is this mindset where you go from BIM to digital construction and engineering.
And there's so much more data to play with now than there ever was before. And I think it's overwhelming for a lot of people because they don't necessarily know where to start. And I think that framework is really defining those outcomes first and then making a really concerted effort to implement a data strategy across the board for your organization. Because if you're not intentional here, it's very hard to step back and go, okay, I have all this data. Like, how is this actionable? Like, what am I going to do with it? And if you look at, a lot of the studies and statistics about data in construction or data in any industry right now, we're at this mildly overwhelming exponential growth rate right now where every year it's more. And so we have to be mindful of what we're doing with it to ensure success and ensure that we're actually analyzing what matters at the end of the day. And does this framework change based on the stakeholder of a project? For example, like what outcomes and performance benchmarks should owners be focused on compared to, say, a general contractor or main contractor or a specialty contractor?
So it is different, Eric. It has to be different because what an owner is trying to do is they're trying to maximize their return on an investment in terms of an asset. They're not managing the process, so to speak. So the owner is thinking about how do I acquire that asset in the most cost efficient way? And then depending on what they're going to do with it at the end, are they going to sell it or are they actually going to sweat the asset and actually use it for the duration of its life? They want to make sure that they're getting their best return on investment. So, that's very different to what a contractor does, which is how do I manage that project for the lifespan of that project and then move on to the next one and then the next one. And so I think that you have to think that the outcomes an owner is looking at are different. Now, we're actually undertaking a project at the moment to really define what we think those outcomes are for owners. Now, the challenge for owners is that they come in so many different guises. They can either be in the manufacturing space, they can be in the infrastructure space, they could be private or they could be public. So actually trying to pick out some of the things that are common to all owners is a unique challenge for us at the moment, and then we're actually deciding on whether we need to look at it through a lens of some of those more generic outcomes that apply to any owner, and then is it that there's some outcomes that are specific based on the type of asset that they're actually trying to procure and use.
That makes a lot of sense just because the needs of somebody who owns, say, a particular set of coffee shops that exists all over the world are going to be dramatically different than, say, a large-scale infrastructure project where you're building roads or bridges or something. Like, both of those are owners at the end of the day, and their needs and requirements are going to be wildly different. So I appreciate that insight there, and it's going to be interesting. And you and I are working on this actually a little bit separately, is we try to figure out, what those common points are, so we can help people, with their outcomes and their project delivery methods at the end of the day.
If I can add something to this, Eric, is a big part of the BIM Level 2 mandate, is this whole focus on the handover and the use of the building. And I think what we were seeing in early days was, we would spend a lot of time collecting information. And then unfortunately, when we come to the handover, that information wasn't very useful. So what was thought that was needed wasn't actually the case at the end, which is, it's very unfortunate because obviously it takes so much time and effort to collect all of this data, and we would like it to be used. So again, there was a big shift there, and I think our clients are now getting their facility management teams involved much earlier in the process. So yes, their requirements are becoming more complex, but they're also becoming more specific. And the great thing is that they're much more useful, and we know that clients will be using this information, or the owners will be using this information at the end, which, makes us all feel much better about it. So
I like that, and I think a lot of people are getting a bit more informed on what to ask for at the start of the project too, because if the owner has a really good sense of what they want at the end of the day and what kind of data they want to analyze, if they identify that up front, and also if they require the people working on the project to ensure they're collecting it, like there's so much more transparency, and at the end of the day, everybody is going to be a lot happier than they might have been if it was just left up to chance, or everybody collects their own data in their own way, and then the turnover package is a little bit more piecemeal. I think that's one of the benefits of platform solutions versus point solutions too, because all that data lives in one single source of truth, and it's much easier to aggregate it for somebody at the end of the day versus finding every single tool you've used across a project and then trying to put it into one common and usable format when you're done. So I've got one more question for each of you as we end this week's episode, and I've asked everybody this question, and I really enjoy seeing how every guest approaches it, because it does vary so wildly every time I do, from a hammer to something a bit more bigger picture. So can you tell me what is one tool you will always carry in your toolbox, no matter what type of project you're working on? And Ivana, I'd love it if we could start with you on this one.
Yes, of course, Eric. As a regular listener for podcasts, I knew that this question is coming up. So I had some time to think yesterday about what's actually replaceable. And I have to say, it wasn't that hard to decide. And this tool that I can't live without is definitely my Apple Pen. And I'm sure my manager is laughing about it, because when I joined the business, he was really worried. I joined the business in the third week of the UK lockdown. So he was very worried that, if I'll receive my laptop on time, whereas the only thing I needed was a pencil. Obviously, you need an iPad to use it, but from my point of view, the iPad doesn't get much use without the pen itself. So I literally enter a panic mode every time it goes missing in my bag. But I think what makes it really great is, it looks like one device, but it's basically, in my head, it's basically a set of all of these pens in different colors, and a set of highlighters, and crayons, and all of these things. And it really enables you to be creative. And as someone who is a very visual type, I like making little sketches even during the meetings when people talk to me. I'll do little mind maps and sketches and diagrams, so I would remember what we were discussing, and it just enables me to kind of declutter my mind and put it all on the iPad. So yeah, I love it. And also, it reduces the need for all the notebooks that you normally lose all over the place. So yeah, it's great.
I like that, and I always lose my notebooks, and I've just stopped trying to write things manually. Everything lives in the cloud, and in this era of everyone working from home, if you can make everything digital even easier than if it would have been otherwise, that's just a step ahead as far as collaborating goes. So I appreciate that a bunch. Matt, how about you? What's your tool that you can't live without from project to project?
Well, because we're actually doing a renovation project at home at the moment, literally the tool I can't do without is actually a tape measure, because I'm constantly finding out whether everything's going to fit, and I'm going back out on site all the time. But less literally, I'd say that the one tool that I use on every single project is just curiosity. I mean, I'm very aware, having worked in the construction industry, that one person can't know everything. So for me, I've just got this natural curiosity to understand how things work, why they're actually the way they are, how you can actually make them better. And I think, Eric, you've worked with me for long enough now, you know that I don't settle on the first answer I'm ever given. So it's really about understanding why things are the way they are, and I really enjoy digging into problems and working with others to try and find out what the fix is. So yeah, I think that's that's definitely part of my background from being in the industry. That's for sure.
I appreciate that a lot, and it makes it a lot of fun to work with you, because we really get down to the core issue of it. And even going back to your first answer, I chuckle because I'm holding a tape measure up to those not on the video call right now. I've got one in my desk. I've got two in my toolbox. I've got one in my car. I rely on my tape measure all the time, even though I'm not actively renovating my house. So thanks for sharing that. And
no problem.
If our listeners have any questions, can you share how they can connect with you?
So for me, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to take questions on LinkedIn, or either direct, or they can just post something if that's how they want to get in touch. But that works for me.
How about you, Ivana?
Same for me. So my surname is quite unique, so it shouldn't be too hard to find me. And if anyone has any questions or wants to discuss anything, I'm happy to be contacted there. Thank you.
Fantastic. And do either of you have anything that you'd like to plug that our listeners should know about, or anything that you'd like to share with them? Matt, how about you go first?
So I've got two things actually, Eric, because if you get given the opportunity, I thought I'd at least push the boundaries a little bit. So one is, we've talked a lot about KPIs and metrics. So one is I've got my AU class, which I believe is still available, which I did on KPIs and metrics. And I think that really gives a perspective of some of the things that we've talked about today. The other thing is, if you're still interested in KPIs and metrics, then we've got our construction benchmarking tool at Autodesk, which will allow you to actually compare yourself to your industry peers. And it'll allow you to go through, which industry you're from, what are the important workflows that you use, and then give you a score and some recommendations for improvement. So I definitely plug those two things.
That's great. And we'll make sure to include links in the show notes to both of those assets so our listeners can easily find those. How about you, Ivana? Do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, one thing, Eric, that I would like to mention, which we haven't touched on, and it's really important for the UK at the moment, is the whole construction to production initiative. And the government has just announced a new task force, which will be focused on modern methods of construction, which is really exciting. And we've been reading articles about designers being asked to redesign buildings, public buildings, so they can be constructed by using modern methods. And for us as a business, this is really important because, again, as part of the strategy, we want to deliver 90% of our work using modern methods of construction. So again, just wanted to mention it because it's going to open new opportunities, and I think we're going to see a lot of exciting stuff coming from that field.
I like that. Thank you for sharing it. And I actually have something to plug. I think our listeners are going to get tired of it, but I'm going to keep doing it for at least a few weeks here. So we launched the new Digital Builder podcast homepage. So if you go to construction.autodesk.com/podcasts, you can click on a button that says Meet the Host and watch a video where I make an absolute fool of myself. So it's a good time. I love it if you check it out. And if you get any feedback, you can reach out to me and let me know. And there are also forms on that page as well to sign up for the Digital Builder biweekly newsletter, and for you to offer suggestions on guests, show themes, or anything that you'd like to share with us as well. So thanks again for joining us on this week's episode of Digital Builder. As always, if you want to reach out with any questions or would like to be a guest on an episode, you can find me on LinkedIn or via Twitter at builder_digital. So don't hesitate to reach out. I do really enjoy getting feedback from the listeners. And of course, please like, subscribe to, or share this episode if you enjoyed it. It does help me out on the back end, so I'd really appreciate it if you did that. And on that final note, goodbye.
You've been listening to Digital Builder. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you're listening with Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to give a quick rating of the show. Simply tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves, and then you're done. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.